My husband said it on a Sunday morning while I was making coffee. I built everything in this marriage. You just stayed home. He said it calmly, like a fact he had been holding for years and had finally decided to put on the table. He looked at me across the kitchen the way people look when they expect no response. I set down my coffee cup. I walked to the study. I came back with a single document and placed it in front of him. He picked it up. He read the first line, then the second, then the third. He put it back down and looked at me differently than he ever had before. My name is Vivian Cross. I am 46 years old. I spent 11 years as a stay-at-home mother while my husband built his career. What he did not know, what he had never once asked about, was what I had been building at the same time. Drop your city in the comments right now. Tell me what time it is where you are. And stay until the end, because the document I put on that table changed everything he thought he knew about our marriage. My husband, Edward Cross, was a corporate attorney. He was good at his work in the specific way that litigators are good. He argued, he persuaded, he won. He had built a successful practice over 15 years, and he spoke about it with the pride of a man who had done something others hadn't. He was not wrong. He had worked hard. There is a version of Edward that I still respect, the version that showed up before 5 a.m. when a brief was due, the version that negotiated settlements, that genuinely helped his clients, the version that built something real from long hours and genuine skill. What I could not accept was the way that real achievement had been allowed to expand until it covered everything, including the parts that were not his. When Edward and I married, we made a deliberate decision together. His practice was growing, and the demands on his time were significant. We wanted children. We agreed that I would step back from my work as a financial analyst to manage our home and raise our family while he focused on building the practice. It was a joint decision, made together in the first year of our marriage. I want to be clear about this, because Edward's version, the version he had apparently been telling himself for years, had quietly rewritten that joint decision into his own singular achievement. In his version, he had built everything. I had simply been present while it happened. I understood this revision was underway for a long time before that Sunday morning. I heard it in the way he spoke at dinner parties, the gradual disappearance of we and the expansion of I. I heard it in the way he described our financial position to his colleagues. I heard it in the small corrections he made to my contributions when I mentioned them in conversation. I said nothing. I watched. I prepared. I want to tell you what preparing looked like, because it was not dramatic. It was not secret phone calls or hidden documents or a plan designed to catch him in something. It was simply the quiet discipline of a person who has learned that the right moment to speak is not always the first moment you could speak. I continued managing our accounts. I continued making investment decisions with the same care I had always brought to them. I continued being the person who handled our tax filings, our insurance reviews, our estate planning discussions with our attorney. I continued, in other words, doing the work that Edward had decided did not count as work. And I kept the account summary updated in the filing cabinet in the study, because I had a sense, growing clearer over the months, that the morning would eventually arrive. Here is what Edward had never asked about and never thought to investigate. Before I married Edward, I had worked for 6 years as a financial analyst. When we married, I brought those savings into our life together. What Edward did not know was that I had never stopped managing money. My mother had passed away 4 years into our marriage and left me an inheritance. Not large. $340,000. Edward knew about the inheritance in general terms. He did not know what I had done with it, because he had never asked. I had invested it carefully over 7 years. I had made decisions that a financial analyst with 6 years of professional experience makes when she has time to think and research and act without urgency. Over 7 years, that $340,000 had become $2.3 million. I want to be specific about how, because I think it matters. I did not get lucky. I did not take large risks. I made the kinds of decisions that a person with 6 years of professional financial analysis experience makes when she has time to research carefully and the discipline to be patient. I invested across diversified index funds and held positions through market fluctuations rather than reacting to them. I identified several sector opportunities in the early years that performed well over the medium term. I reinvested returns consistently rather than drawing them out. And I did all of this quietly, without anyone asking, across the same years that I was being described as someone who had simply stayed home. $2.3 million in accounts that were mine, grown across the years that Edward had been telling people he built everything. The Sunday morning with the coffee was not the first time Edward had made a comment about having built everything. It was the most direct. He had been building toward it for months and increasing confidence in his version of events. A growing ease with the narrative of the self made man married to the woman who stayed home. That Sunday morning, something in me decided it was time to respond. I went to the study. I opened the file cabinet. I took out the account summary I had printed 2 days earlier when I had sensed the conversation was coming. 7 years of investment history. Current balance. All of it on one page, organized the way a financial analyst organizes things clearly, completely, with nothing missing. I placed it on the kitchen table in front of my husband. He picked it up. He read the header, my name, the account numbers, the institution. He read the current balance. I watched his eyes stop on the number. $2,347,000. He looked up at me. I said, "You built your practice. I'm glad. It's significant, and you worked hard for it." I paused. "While you were doing that, I was doing this." He looked at the paper again. He said, "I didn't know about this. You didn't ask." He put the paper down slowly. He looked at the kitchen, at the house we lived in, at the life he had been describing for years as something he had built alone. "How long?" he said. 7 years of growth. The original inheritance was 4 years into our marriage. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about the dinner parties, the corrections, the gradual disappearance of we. I thought about 11 years of watching my contribution be quietly erased from the story he told about us. "I was waiting," I said, "until it became relevant." That conversation was not the end of our marriage. What happened was something more complicated and, in some ways, more important. Edward went to his office that Monday and came home that evening quieter than I had seen him in years. He sat at the dinner table and asked me questions he had not asked in a long time. About the investments, about the decisions I had made, about the analyst I had been before I became the person who stayed home. He listened. That was the part I had not expected. He listened the way people listen when they have realized something significant and are trying to understand how they missed it. Over the following weeks, something shifted between us. The way things shift when one person's understanding of another person changes at a fundamental level. Edward stopped saying I built everything. He stopped saying it at dinner parties. He stopped saying it in conversation. He started saying we again, the way he had in the first years of our marriage, before the story had been revised. I stayed home. Edward is right about that. I stayed home and I raised 2 children who are now in college. I stayed home and managed a household that ran without crisis for 11 years. I stayed home and grew an inheritance into $2.3 million through careful, patient, informed decision-making across 7 years. None of that appeared in the story Edward told at dinner parties. All of it appeared on the page I placed on the kitchen table that Sunday morning. I have thought about what I would say to someone who is in the position I was in for 11 years, contributing significantly to a shared life, while watching that contribution be slowly erased from the story the other person tells. What I would say is this: keep records. Not out of suspicion, not as a weapon, but because your work deserves documentation the same way any work does. The investment statements I kept were not kept in anticipation of that Sunday morning. They were kept because they represented real decisions and real results, and real things deserve to be recorded. And when the moment arrives, and it will arrive, in some form. For anyone whose contribution has been undervalued, let the document speak. Not with anger, not with accusation, simply with the numbers that have always been true, placed quietly on the table where they can finally be seen. He is wrong about what that means. Now I want to hear from you. If someone told you that you had contributed nothing, that everything around you had been built without you, what would you do? Would you argue? Or would you let the document speak? Tell me in the comments, and tell me the city you are watching from. I want to see how far Vivian's story has traveled. Subscribe before you go. More stories are coming that you will not want to miss.